At my number 8 spot, for more probable drug-fueled fun in the writing room, I am selecting 2001's Jason X. New Line Cinema's next attempt at a Jason Voorhees film. Jason has been captured and the government cannot find a way to kill him, so instead they are keeping him contained at the Crystal Lake Research Facility. He inevitably escapes but becomes cryogenically frozen with our lead character Rowan in a room until the year 2455, when a crew on a spaceship discovers them. Earth is now uninhabitable, so they are headed back to the creatively named Earth 2. So, 10th film. They are still really going for it here, scraping together anything they can to make money, and this was even Kane Hodder's last hurrah as Jason. Jason in space. They really went for it. But, is this film bad? Oh yeah, no shit. But do I hate this film and find it hard to get through? Not necessarily. Despite an endless list of shortcomings, this is truly a guilty pleasure, and I actually found myself having some nostalgic, shitty, early 2000s, low-budget sci-fi fun. It's reminiscent of every bad 90s to early 2000s sci-fi film, and I wouldn't watch this over and over again, but it is more rewatchable to me than the previous entries on my list so far. And of course, this film has, your weak writing, annoying characters, a general lack of suspense, and decent scares overall, but, they weren't really going for any of that shit. And we're even graced with a brief cameo from legendary director David Cronenberg, who just wanted to appear briefly for fun, but he also kind of did it as a favor to former protege and director of this film, James Isaac. And also a decent subplot Jason X has is, aside from Jason on a spaceship, is that you have these disagreements between these higher-up officials as to whether Jason should be destroyed somehow, or preserved for research on his incredible regenerative abilities. And the idea of these power-hungry individuals coming into play here was not a bad aspect of this film. But our characters, again, are nothing remarkable. There's also an amusing lack of anything convincing that these people are scientists, and particularly with the women dressed in the future of scientists/research attire, crop tops, and deep V shirts. But this film isn't heavy on sex or nudity this time around, surprisingly, but it has a couple moments, and some of these moments are the most bizarre in the franchise. Particularly the Professor Lowe character having not sex with a student, where his nipples are the only things getting stimulated. And then tied in with this scene is a humanoid character named KM, wanting to appear more human. And this is actually an okay addition in general, with that little existential crisis she's having, but our first insight into this, while also being cut in with this uncomfortable nipple play scene, is that KM is introduced by getting these fake metallic nipples placed on her breast. It's just all so weird. And you can tell it's played for laughs somewhat, but really just comes across as awkward more than anything. And also KM even has this human love interest named Tucenaron, Tsunami, whatever stupid fucking name they gave him, I don't know. Jason 10, man. Shit. But outside of some odd characteristics and moments, the extra campiness and self-awareness that comes with this 10th installment has actually grown on me a little over the years. And has actually grown on a lot of younger fans of the franchise as well. Could it have been better? Abso-fucking-lutely. But it can be fun sometimes in its ridiculousness. I also like how they incorporated a simulated Camp Crystal Lake scene, and it was used as a distraction towards the end, while the rest of the crew was trying to get off the ship. And it actually even used popular tropes to distract Jason for some freebie kills. 2 slutty girls ready for premarital sex, and booze, of course. Although Kane Hodder did have to relive one of his least favorite kills of slamming somebody in a sleeping bag against a tree. I'm sure that was a fun memory for him. And I can also guess this scene probably had the most paused movie moments in the franchise by teen prepubescent boys. But it was a fun, stupid incorporation of the traditional setting, though. And this next thing, they didn't have much of this, but I like when there are like comedic, technological, like knowledge barriers in films. These people have all this technology here in 2455, but they weren't aware of simple things from our time, such as the kind of mask Jason is wearing. And then, of course, you get the all knowing KM who has to explain hockey to them and what kind of mask he's wearing. Speaking of, side note, according to Jason X, the classic Jason X, the sport hockey will be outlawed in 2024, so say bye bye to hockey this year, guys. It's been fun. But anyways, one of the dumbest moments, which may also be one of my favorite moments in a way, is Professor Lowe's logic when he comes face to face with Jason for the first time. He awaits his death, but Jason simply picks up his fallen machete and just kind of stares at him for a minute. So, Professor Lowe now just assumes all Jason wanted this whole time was his machete. Despite all the other lives he's already taken up to this point in the movie, now he just simply wants his machete back that he's been separated from for like 10 seconds. A grown man reached this conclusion. It's so stupid, but I can't help but laugh at it, especially when he dies soon after this. And especially with his plan of keeping Jason alive for those money-hungry assholes who wanted to just do research on him no matter the risk. I don't get why his death had to be off-screen. Like, some of the most unlikable characters in the franchise have off-screen deaths, and I just don't get it. And again, with the kills in general, this one, they're just okay overall, but there are some highlight, disturbing ones. Instead of rapidly snapping a soldier's neck at one point, Kane Hodder actually had the idea of slowly doing it in one scene, which was actually much more unsettling. But probably the most memorable, probably arguably one of the most memorable in the whole franchise, was Adrian getting her face frozen and then having it shattered against a table that Jason throws her into. I did not expect that level of creativity this time around. Probably some of the worst line delivery and timing comes after a soldier is impaled by some large corkscrew machine Jason throws him on. And another soldier discovers this, and her status report to their boss, Sergeant Brodsky, is, "He's screwed." I get soldiers are supposed to be these hardened figures, but she sees a comrade that she has likely had to spend a lot of time with over the years, and her first reaction to seeing his dead body is to deliver a shitty, lazy pun. Oh man, my boy died. Bet I got a fucking zinger for the Sarge. But characters are also still comically dumb, of course. At one point thinking Jason gave up on getting to them just because they're behind a locked door. Ignoring the very accessible large window in the same exact room. KM and Tusanarun have sexual tension at the height of the climax when they're trying to escape. Also, Rowan was aware of Jason's abilities, but took her sweet-ass time really driving the point home after they woke her up. And then after KM supposedly kills Jason with her special space gun that blows off most of his face, she fails to use her all-knowing special analytic abilities to consider that his body fell onto the very table that is literally used to restore people and their injuries, and this includes even amputations. This, however, does lead to Jason's new look, and for a bad little low-budget sci-fi film, it's an okay change of pace. But too bad he gets zero action in it, essentially. So with Jason X, you get an incompetent film with awkward sequences and comedy that occasionally works. I can also see why many people hate it and see nothing redeemable about it. And after the bomb that was Jason Goes to Hell, you would think that maybe they would have tried something a little less over the top and ridiculous, maybe. And Jason's death is still ambiguous, but possible, with Sergeant Brodsky's sacrifice as they plummet into Earth 2, and you see his mask fall to the bottom of a lake, with no other scene, no other twist. But anyways, we only really get 2 other films after this anyway that aren't related at all, so who cares, essentially. Despite this film's uniqueness, it really still bombed in theaters, but it did pretty incredible with DVD sales. And this film also, again, had multiple script rewrites, which, once again, has worked pretty much never. Also, space entries and long-standing franchises, particularly horror franchises, seem to be cursed or something, with a lot of popular franchises coming to a close after their space entry, or either that or they're getting rebooted later on down the road. This includes Hellraiser, Leprechaun, Critters, just to name a few. And with the writers, Todd Farmer originally had a darker script, which may have been cool to see. They ended up going with Louis Abernathy's instead, which had more of this camp and this humor. So I think I'm going to give Jason X a 4.8 out of 10. You either embrace it some, or you're just repulsed by it. So, which are you? At number 7, we are back to tradition. After a few films away from Camp Crystal Lake, we are back with the 2009 Friday the 13th remake. After watching these again in order, the setting back at the original place was quite refreshing actually. This was a joint project with Paramount and New Line Cinema, finally, as well as Platinum Dunes. Plus we get Michael Bay as a producer. Okay, sure, why not? So with the OG setting and a revamped, more modern entry, I was excited to give this one another go. I feel like this one being so low will surprise many people, as a lot of fans love the remake. And I do get it, but I wouldn't say I quite share that same love, unfortunately. And I didn't remember being impressed with this one in the past, but my opinions over the years have changed, and it has been a while, so I was ready to go in with an open mind once again and give this one the benefit of the doubt. And remakes in general are often disappointing, but it's always cool to try and see if a new vision or some new adjustments are worthwhile. With the opening credits, we are basically given the ending of the 1980 film, the iconic standoff between the lone camp counselor and Pamela Voorhees. This reincarnation is nothing special, but still impactful. It reminds you of Jason's origins, or introduces them to you if you have not seen the original or any of the other films. The actress playing Mrs. Voorhees is no Betsy Palmer, but I still like this as an opening sequence. Jason sees his mother beheaded and is forever angry about it. Derek Mears portrays Jason this time around, and while I missed Kane Hodder, he was still a good Jason. And this was the highest budget a Friday the 13th film got. And despite its many flaws, it was cool to get a more modern installment, a more modern take on the franchise. And in the case of Jason, he is incredibly aggressive and swift here. We honestly don't get many highlight franchise kills this time around, but Jason is terrifying all the same. The series had gotten to the point where Jason only walks and he essentially teleports places to easily catch his victims, but I like they kind of went back to the beginning here with the earlier vision of Jason, where Jason will actually run when he needs to. And to me, Jason running is so much more terrifying, with this roided out, pissed off force who is not only strong as fuck, but also fast as shit too. They tried to make Jason particularly territorial here. No real intention of leaving camp, but apparently he draws people in too. I was kind of confused on Jason's goals and some of the trivia I read, but apparently some of the weed plants the opening group searches for and finds on the grounds was, I guess, planted by Jason to draw people in to kill. Please correct me if I'm wrong here, as I have a hard time, number one, believing that Jason plants anything in any universe, but then he also kidnaps one member of this group while simply killing the others, which was also odd. The opening group of friends are quite annoying. The only one who matters anyway is the kidnapped Whitney, but holy shit, was this a fun introduction to this new Jason. My favorite shot in the whole film probably may be Richie's POV of Jason sprinting at him while he helplessly remains trapped in a bear trap. Oh yeah, also, Jason sets traps now. And that part, I'm not mad at. They also introduce a new sleeping bag kill, not slamming somebody against a tree, but hanging a trapped victim in a sleeping bag over a campfire. And to a certain extent, that sounds so much worse. But with Jason kidnapping Whitney, my only guess for this is to draw in maybe her brother Clay, who does come to look for her, but I just have some issues with this. I don't think he knew she had a sibling. He didn't know her, and he seemingly decided last minute not to kill her, so I really did not get why he kidnapped anybody in the first place. But really, I'm not going to hyper-focus on this, so that's beside the point. But one new aspect I did enjoy was how they explain his maneuvering the campground so much quicker than everybody else. And that is that he utilizes underground tunnels this time around, and I thought that was a really cool touch. The next group we meet, our main group, is slightly more tolerable, somewhat, but at the end of the day, most of them are just bodies. And I like that they gave Jason a burlap sack mask to start this film off, similar to Part 2, and I enjoyed that in Part 2 as well. Plus we do get that decent hockey mask reveal scene after he kills that creepy, perverted redneck character who's only slightly less creepy than the inbred cannibals in the Wrong Turn films. To switch gears for just a minute, this may be the film with the most sex and nudity in the franchise. And they're not super graphic or long, but it was a noticeable difference. The rating scale has changed a lot over the years, and you can get away with a lot more and still keep that R rating versus switching to NC-17. So I guess they saw the opportunity to ramp this up as well as the gore. Ironically, this remake got criticism for the amount of sex that was in it, which is really ironic because the other sequels in the past were sometimes criticized for not having enough. I thought that was kind of amusing. And also Michael Bay complained about this as well. The same Michael Bay who likes to spend a fourth of a lot of his newer films ogling young women on screen. Women young enough to be his daughter or close to it. That Michael Bay. But I guess nudity's where he draws the line. Guess technically it makes a difference. But this time around I don't think it really took away from the main focus, the horror aspect. I don't have much really to say about it otherwise. The only thing I could have done without was the character Trent complimenting Bree's nipple placement during sex. I mean, I know us guys like boobs and everything, but that was just the oddest compliment you could give somebody. He complimented her nipple placement. How did she not climb off of him at that moment and leave the fucking room? I will never know. But while I liked a lot of the shots and some of the kills, I do feel the film struggles to build sufficient suspense. It's just really disappointing because I feel like they could have done a lot with Jason and eating up this scenery and the setting, but I just ultimately felt underwhelmed. Because Jason appearing was at least 90% of the time predictable. Some tired tropes and tired kills, and don't get me wrong, some are effective. Jason at one point bursting through a floorboard was nice. You have a cop showing up at Trent's house to try and help them, but then Jason jumps down from the roof before he even gets a chance to knock on the door. But otherwise, a lot of them just felt really repetitive, and just really lacked that feeling of dread. It just felt like a lot of copy-paste from the past. And there were some intentionally comedic moments which worked mostly. The Chewie character was fine comedic relief at times. His first reaction to Jason being to hand him a hockey stick he was fucking with, just to help him complete his outfit. Plus, right before that, we got a really cool shot of Jason towering right over him while he was in the shed. But while this entry had some laughs, I actually kind of liked that they toned down the campiness a bit to try for a more consistently darker tone, a little more of a grounded approach. Then we get to the finale with the chase and the freeing of Whitney, and honestly this whole third act was really just okay. It's a fine finish. I did get a shock with Jenna's death. She was kind of the good girl character and potential love interest of Clay, so it was an interesting turn of events killing her off. I did not expect that. We get to the final setting on the dock. It's clear what's coming. They once again go with Jason popping out from the lake and grabbing Whitney and pulling her under. And it's likely as a dream sequence, but they of course leave it kind of ambiguous, but it's just been done so many times and done better. And I get this is a remake, so they kind of had to go with something similar for the ending, but it just feels so lazy and actually kind of rushed as well this time around. But I think there was a sequel planned that just never happened. So I'm sure they had other ideas to expand on everything. Marcus Nispel was the director this time around, and he also directed the 2003 Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a film with a similar feeling of grittiness and aggressiveness. That was also effective in many ways. But definitely, to compare the two, I do think that a 2003 Texas Chainsaw remake was done a lot better than this one. It is a shame we didn't get at least one more sequel, as this was the largest opening weekend for a remake at the time, beating out 2004's The Grudge. But they dropped the sequel to switch gears for Darren Aronofsky's Mother, which was controversial, to say the least, and I will talk about that film one day, but objectively, it was a financial embarrassment opening weekend, so great marketing, guys. But I'll give 2009's Friday the 13th a 5.5 out of 10. On another day, I may switch out this one with my next spot coming up, but for now, this is where my enjoyment lies. Now, at my number 6 spot, I'm giving it to Friday the 13th Part 3. The one that was in 3D. And don't get me wrong, I still have a lot of issues with this one, but with the 80s vibe still, plus this being the very first time Jason gets his iconic hockey mask, plus just some other little things sprinkled in here and there, this just pushes past my number 7 spot. Although one thing I didn't like, this film, like Part 2, insisted on starting off with a prolonged flashback. Hell, it's just most of the ending of the second film again. And that's just so frustrating that it takes up so much time. I can understand some brief flashback montages or something to catch the audience up, but verbatim showing the final scene of the last movie is just overkill. Most people are not going to jump into a sequel without seeing the previous film or the original, and if they do, shit, that's their fault. Just show a brief 1 minute or so broken flashback, and that should be plenty to remind audiences where they left off. It's not that deep. It's a slasher film. Past that, we get our title card, and I've actually enjoyed a lot of these earlier title cards, no matter how cheesy or odd they might be. And this one had some interesting little funky 80s type sound. It does feel a little more like the theme to a kid's Halloween movie, either from this time or even in the early 90s, but I was still kind of into it. But now, the damn 3D. They love their gimmick here. It's crazy how much 3D has changed, but even for this time, this was not the first film to utilize it, and it wasn't as common, and here it does feel like a crutch in some ways. 3D today doesn't really add much for me in most films, as it just feels like an uninspired add-on to drive up ticket prices. So to be fair here, they do try and make it fun for audiences. It just kind of ruins several moments when it's not good. And there are some cool shots, especially for the time, sure. I can envision a lot of moviegoers really getting into it. When you step back and try and see the movie for what it is, the 3D gimmick can really ruin the tempo and the effect of the film. And a lot of the 3D is just an object coming at the screen, followed by this awkward pause where it just lingers for a few seconds. And whether you view all this in 3D or not, that's just kind of off-putting to me. And it's a real momentum killer, especially in a horror film. I mean, you do get maybe a handful of decent kill scenes here that kind of work, but that's about it. Our friend group we follow this time around is more of the same. There's a couple you're supposed to care about, but ultimately, several are just for Jason to release his unlimited supply of pent-up aggression on. And we get a more personal experience here and there with the 3D, with for one thing, our two pothead characters passing a blunt our way towards the audience. And honestly, I don't smoke, but that's kind of a cool little moment, I guess, especially in theaters. I can see a lot of people reaching for the screen for that. A little something to invite us in. Chris, or Chrissy, whatever you want to call her, is our lead character. Chuck and Chili are those two hippie potheads, the fun couple this time around to make us laugh here and there before they die. Of all the things, probably the worst addition we get here in part 3 is the fucking Shelly character. Jesus Christ, Shelly is horrendous. There's only one other character in this entire franchise I hate more, and I will get to them later, but Shelly is annoying as shit. Chris, of course, is the only one who really is slapped with a backstory, returning to this place all these years later after being traumatized by Jason, actually, who chased her while she was alone in the woods after storming off from a fight with her parents, and she is coming back trying to cope with that. And someone trying to help her is the homeowner of this place they are visiting, who is apparently an old fling that she had, and his name is Rick. And they tried to make the backstory darker by having Jason sexually assault her, which for some reason is not the only time in the franchise they try to make Jason do some real creeper shit, but thankfully they once again cut the idea. I must say though, when I watched this film this time around, I did not know this piece of trivia until after the fact. So when I saw this film, I was actually wondering if they were going in that direction with this flashback chase scene. I don't know why, I can't really explain it. Just something about the camera angle and the way Chris was laying down against the tree, and then Jason being unmasked, smiling, creepily walking up on her. I was wondering for a second exactly where this was all going, but thankfully they ended up keeping it straight arrow. It's just, I don't know, that whole scene felt like this bad, oddball, taboo porno intro vibe, just for a few seconds at least. Then we have the biker gang Shelly pisses off at the convenience store. The convenience store that apparently doesn't take no damn food stamps, as they seem to tell everybody who gets in line. But anyways, the biker gang is goofy as hell, but provided some additional body count and conflict that kind of worked. Although one of them does die with the slowest fall in cinema history after being stabbed with a pitchfork. The pitchfork's handle, of course, lingering in front of the camera for you to process for several seconds. And you get that 3D gold, and it's immediately followed up with a 3D juggling scene. A convenient skill a couple characters have. God, they love their 3D. But my favorite scene, though, in which the 3D actually kind of works the most, is the spear gun kill. It's fine 3D for what it is, plus it's also the first on-screen kill by Jason with his new hockey mask. The hockey mask he actually stole off Shelly's body, so I guess Shelly was kind of good for something besides whining and fake scaring his friends 3 or 4 different times. And looking back on the first film, that original film, the effect of Kevin Bacon's death in the first film was really well done, and actually one of the few effective jump scares in that film. But in this franchise, they kept, well, paying homage, as I'm sure the term they like to call it, but really they keep ripping off his death multiple times, at least a handful of other times in the franchise, and it just gets overdone, even by part 3 here. And this time it's done with a character in a hammock. It just felt like a wasted kill and a wasted opportunity. And I mean, for Christ's sakes, the predecessor to this kill was the bizarre handstand kill. The one where I think the character Andy randomly walks out of a room in a handstand after sex, which is the oddest decision I have ever heard of, and misses his split-second decision to switch to his feet to fight off Jason. Chili's death is potentially the most laughable in the franchise, not because of how she dies, but because of the extended build-up to it after she finds Shelly dead. And the main issue, one, of course, is her acting, which is painfully, hilariously awful, even for slasher film standards. But what was worse was how long they let her run and scream before Jason hits her snooze button. Like, she's yelling, she's crying, of course, typical, but she's like trotting around like she's never run before in her life. And it just takes so long. She even runs up a flight of stairs just to stay up there for a few seconds. Then she comes all the way back down just a moment later for no reason. And it's just so prolonged. And I just feel like the actress was given no direction and she was just horribly improvising. I understand people have some odd mannerisms in a panic, but for the sake of maintaining tone and intensity, maybe this could have used another cut. The finale is alright still, with Chris giving a decent fight in the barn before gifting Jason with an axe to the dome. Jason even reaches out for what feels like him trying to give us a 3D hug before collapsing and supposedly dying again. And they kept it going with a fake-out dream sequence ending for some reason. And Chris, this time around, like Alice in the first film, is in a canoe. But we do get Jason spotting her from the second story of the house, and he has no mask on, and he starts to run down towards her. And this sight is creepy as hell, seeing this vicious killer spot you and get so excited they start running down towards you. It's a haunting image, but it's partially ruined by the inventive choice to make Jason hiss. For the first and only time ever, he hisses, and it is just awful. Terrible decision making. But he soon disappears, and Chris is pulled down to the water, not by Jason this time, but actually by Mrs. Voorhees. And then Chris wakes up and she's laughing and crying hysterically, clearly has lost her mind, and she's on the way to the hospital. I guess the motto for a while with these first 3 films was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The thing about Part 3, it really proved that they needed to try a little harder if they're going to continue with this franchise. And they did leave it open as to whether Jason was dead or not. And of course, they couldn't let such a lucrative franchise go that easily. Richard Brooker was Jason here, and he does a fine job. No major issues, and we get a couple interesting kills here and there, but nothing making me eager to pop the sequel back in anytime soon, necessarily. The original plot of this movie was Amy Steele as Jenny from Part 2, and she was coming back and going to this psych hospital where Jason tracks her down. And they had this psych hospital setting as an early idea a few times over the years, but here especially, I feel like the timing would have been really bad, as Halloween 2 came out a year before with the same plotline. But thankfully, Amy Steele declined anyway. But I'll give Part 3 a 5.6 out of 10. Still slightly better overall entertainment value, and some iconic moments versus the 2009 remake, which fell a little more flat to me. So I'm placing this one ever so slightly higher.